Thanks. Again, on behalf of the Eastern Transportation Coalition, we welcome you today to the RITIS user group meeting. We're just going to go through a couple of very brief housekeeping items. First of all, we're using Zoom webinar today. You can connect for audio either through your computer or through your phone. This web meeting is being recorded. If you have any questions about the web or the audio, please reach out to Esther Cleet. You'll note that the chat box is not available to participants. You are going to use the Q&A box today to ask your questions. So you can simply type your question into the box and we will be keeping track of those. And at the end of each presentation, we'll have some time for those questions to be answered. If you'd like to ask a question verbally or to elaborate, please feel free to hit the raise hand bar. That'll put you to the top of the list and we'll know that you'd like to speak and we can unmute your line. At this point, I'd love to turn it over to Denise Marco, who is the Tismo Program Director for the Eastern Transportation Coalition. Denise?
Thanks, Joanna. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you all could make it. This is some good information that we're going to give out to you today through the presentations. But let me start real quick with next slide, Joanna. I think I'd like to introduce the events we've been having. So every meeting we do this. This is a slide that kind of gives you an update on some of the activities that the coalition has been doing. Because we've had quite a few events going on, we've limited this really for your this meeting to the data events that we've had. So you can see on the screen the recent events. In April, we had a great webinar on CAV data. We were working with Redis on the Performance Enhancement Working Group. That's a web meeting where states come together and prioritize some of the projects that they might want done in Redis, and then look at the available funding to get it done. If you're interested in being on that group, I think Michael Pack is the contact to get involved with that. We also had our strategic planning sessions in April, May, and June to set out our work plan. If you go to the coalition's website at the very bottom of the front page, the work plan is there for you all to take a look at. These are some of the activities and topics and guidance from the executive board that we're going to be working on this coming year. The RITIS, we had a workshop, a performance measures reporting working group meeting at the end of June. And then looked at a freight data planning working group meeting. Mary Grace Parker leads that group, and they're looking at some of the data, the data sets from the freight vendors in the TDM marketplace. That's coming up, I think, in I think down below. So those are some of the database or data related events we've had up to now. Moving forward after today, some of the stuff that we've got on the agenda and on the calendar. You can go to our website and look at it in the calendar. We have a working group with Google Maps. And so we have a data meeting with them scheduled for August 9th, looking at how we can improve getting better data to them, as well as, we do this with Waze. We're now moving to Google Maps to get better data for the traveler in that meeting. We have 2 vendor forums that are coming up, one in August and one in September. It says to be confirmed, but the September 14th has now been confirmed. Those are sessions, 2 sessions in the morning, 2 sessions in the afternoon on each day. And we're going to showcase the vendors that have contracts within the TDM. And this was a request by some of the members because it gives you an idea to see the ability to see back-to-back the vendors. Some of the vendors have been coming directly for meetings with states, but this gives you an opportunity to see the waypoint data vendors back-to-back and the origin destination vendors back-to-back. So those are the first 2 that we have scheduled in August and September. Mary Grace Parker is going to take the freight data sets and look at the vendors there and have a forum in September. Again, the ability to look at some of these data vendors and compare back to back once you see the presentations. And then the TDM technical advisory meeting set in October. That is a quarterly event. It's done by or driven by Stan Young. Really looks at the data sets that we're working with, and it's a validation council meeting that talks about how to best and what's the best method forward for validating some of the data. So they meet quarterly. Next meeting is October 11th. And then obviously the next RITIS user group meeting is scheduled for October 20th. So again, a lot going on in the data world, but we always want to make sure you have an opportunity to know what's coming forward. Next slide, Joanna. And then again, the traffic data marketplace update. It's now live. The contracts have been signed and countersigned. So as of July 1, we have an 8-year contract with these 6 data sets: travel time and speed, volume conflation, origin destination, waypoint, and freight. Again, if you go to the website, it'll give you the information in terms of what vendor has what contract. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're holding vendor forums. The first 3 are happening August and September. Again, it's another opportunity to see the vendors and see what they're offering. There will be in next year in February, we're going to also take another step forward and look at the analytics platforms, the different platforms that are out there. That'll be a forum we're putting together in February. And then the volume data set will be the final forum again next year as well. So a lot going on in the TDM. We also have a new automated data use agreement process. For those of you that are familiar with it, if you are a state agency, you are an affiliate member or a consultant or a university looking to work with the data, there is a new automated online process to go. Again, that information is on the website. So with that being said, I think I'm going to introduce Jesse and move forward. Thanks for being with us. All righty, so Jesse Burke is one of our great, I can't say enough about him, a great data RITIS co-chair. He has a background in congestion management. He works a lot with project development and coordination, and I think he's responsible for maintaining and updating the Pennsylvania, New Jersey TIPS, Transportation Improvement Plans. It's for that DVRPC region. He's also one of our, as I mentioned, he's a co-chair for our PDA Suite User Group, or basically our RITIS user group, and he's worked closely with PennDOT, providing assistance for the multi-year, multi-billion reconstruction of I-95, long overdue in Philadelphia. For those of you that may have heard earlier, he attended the University of Wisconsin, so he's a fellow Badger. He's got a master's in environmental studies from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's been recognized as a top professional in the realm of TDM, Transportation Demand Management, for his work implementing a range of strategies in PennDOT District 6. So, Jesse, thank you so much for being part of us, the coalition. We always appreciate you and the work you do. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Denise. Appreciate it. A little overdressed today. We actually just approved an update of our Pennsylvania Transportation Improvement Program for the Southeast region here in Pennsylvania. So an exciting day for us, but happy to be here because we have another great meeting here for everyone. If you want to go to the next slide, I can run through the agenda here. So we're in the process of doing welcome and introductions here. We've got a really great spotlight presentation from Sam Harris talking about GDOT's use of RITIS for some safety analysis. I think that'll be of interest to a lot of folks. Then we've got Michael Pack is going to talk about some interesting analysis looking at how freight was rerouted during a major 4-hour closure of I-95 in Baltimore. Using some of the origin destination data, really interesting stuff. Then Rick Ayers and Michael Pack are going to sort of trade off on a bunch of different updates from some of our working groups and also the latest enhancements to the various tools. And we're hoping to have a lot of input from everyone on the call here today. I see we've already got a question in the Q&A. That's great. Keep them coming, especially as we get into the presentations. We'd really love to facilitate as much dialogue as we can here today. So next slide, please. To introduce our speakers for today, Michael Pack, as always with us. He's the director of the University of Maryland CATT Lab, where he works to make transportation data more easily accessible and usable by ops, planners, and researchers. Michael had previously worked at University of Virginia and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Also pleased to welcome Sam Harris, the State Safety Engineering Manager for Georgia DOT. Sam graduated from Georgia College with a bachelor's in science and the Georgia Institute of Technology with a bachelor's and a master's in civil engineering. Sam's a registered professional engineer in the state of Georgia, and his work with GDOT started with timing traffic signals, traffic modeling, connected vehicles, also assisting the state's development of automated traffic signal performance metrics. But now Sam's actually working as the state safety engineering manager for GDOT, in charge of facilitating the state's HSIP funding. So it's an interesting perspective, blending sort of operations and looking at safety. And finally, we also have Rick Ayers presenting today. He's a public sector advocate with the University of Maryland CATT Lab. Rick has over 30 years of experience working with location-based enterprise software systems. at the federal, state, and local levels. In his current role at the CATT Lab, he serves to support state and local transportation agencies in the successful implementation and deployment of the Regional Integrated Transportation Information System, which we all know and love as RITIS, what we're here today to talk about. Rick's also worked extensively with the Eastern Transportation Coalition member agencies, as well as federal and state transportation agencies to support and manage various enterprise implementation of RITIS platform. So next slide. Just to see, as always, we have tremendous attendance from all around the country. It's really great to see, not that long ago, we really had most of our attendance coming from up and down the East Coast, but now not only do we have that, but reaching all the way out to the West Coast and everywhere in between. So really appreciate everyone joining here today. Next slide, please. So we want to do just a quick poll to ask folks how often you attend these meetings. Do you attend once or twice a year, 3 or 4 times a year, or maybe this is your first meeting? So why don't we go ahead and launch that poll? Give everybody a couple of seconds here to vote. I'm sure you all know how often you attend, but this is really helpful for us to see how many folks are new to these meetings. We have a lot of regulars, which is always great. We appreciate everyone's attendance.
Okay, we're just going to close the poll and just a couple comments.
Great. So as we can see, a lot of people who attend pretty regularly, but a fair number who this is their first meeting. So thank you and welcome to everyone joining for the first time. So next slide here. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sam Harris for his presentation on Georgia DOT's use of RITIS for safety. Take it away, Sam.
Great.
All right, everybody can hear me okay and see my screen?
Yes, we can, Sam.
Perfect, thank you so much. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about the use of RITIS for safety purposes. So in my bio, I alluded to a little bit, but I have an operations background and was enthralled in the early stages of RITIS for the Georgia DOT, including the ATSPM as well. And went over and decided to take a look at the safety program and manage that. And if anyone's worked with safety data, they know it could be a little bit longer. It's not as in real time. So I look for a way to be able to take the stuff I learned from operations and speed up the process a little bit on the safety side. So and looking at today, the 3 takeaways. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about what the safety program is at GDOT, how congestion scans can be used to be able to justify safety projects, and high-level data analysis can be used to program safety projects is the other key takeaway. So agency overview, real quickly, just some of you may be familiar with Georgia, but we are unique in certain areas. We do have a lot of counties, 159 only behind Texas. We average about 400,000 crashes a year. 606 state routes and interstates take up about 3% of our lane miles, which I always think is an interesting fact. We have 7 districts, and our commissioner is Russell McMurray, and we are home of the world champion Braves. So for the safety program, the vision of the program is to reduce fatalities and injuries on Georgia roadways by using a safety data-driven approach. And the data-driven can be underlined, bolded out, because that is very, very important in how we conduct ourselves. And what I actually show you today is just a tip of an iceberg on how to do something quickly in order to be able to break it down and get into the details of stuff and actually programming a project. But the objectives, we want to take care of the fatalities, pedestrian bike, roadway departure, lane departure, intersection, off system. These are all important areas and emphasis areas for our state. So just in case you're not familiar, but crashes are broken out into a CAPCO scale. This is K for fatality, so A for serious injury, B for minor, C for complaint, and O for property. Now, what dictates that in order to what type of crash severity you have, there's a lot of things that play into it, but really speed is one of those main factors that play into it. So anytime you could reduce speed, in most scenarios, you're going to be able to reduce the severity of a crash depending on the angle of it. And speaking of the angles, again, just quick overview in terms of manner of collision. When we work with crashes, we're looking at rear end angles, left turns or through or right, side swipe opposite and same direction, not a collision with a motor vehicle. That includes pedestrians, bicycle, scooter, animal, etc. And head on is the other main manner of collision. And over here on the right hand side, you can actually see these are the point of conflicts. So again, I mentioned just a few seconds ago that speed is one of the keys to safety. And in order to make intersection or roadway safer, you want to reduce those speeds. But the also main thing is want to reduce those conflict points. So if you're able to redo both of those, there's a really good chance you're making the roadway safer. So I'm going to jump into what we call the in-town multimodal safety analysis. So the need and purpose of this study was we get a lot of requests and at the DOT level, at our local stakeholder level, that we need more dedicated infrastructure for that serve other modes of transportation, like pedestrian, cyclists, transit. And so with that, in the main area that we receive a lot of those requests is actually in Atlanta in the Midtown downtown area. But with that, my management came to me and said, we need an answer. About 2 months is what you have. We need you to review the entire Atlanta area. You break it down how you want, but we need to have a good understanding of how we can reutilize and project on future projects that focus in on these areas. So that high level analysis. And it's going to not only include the crash data, we need to dive into the operational data, the roadway characteristics, and any existing transportation plans, and develop that prioritized list. And so 2 months is not a lot of time. 2 years may be too much time, but that would have been nice. But 2 months really provided us kind of the structure of how we need to look at this. So in terms of methodology, we really needed to break it down in terms of where we were going to look. That was the first important point. What was the boundaries? So if you're familiar with Atlanta, there is, or not familiar with Atlanta, we have what is called the Atlanta Beltline. And that's a sidewalk. I just got done with listening to a presentation where they call it a glorified sidewalk, but it's actually an outstanding multi-use trail that is still under construction here in Atlanta, but it's actually utilizing existing railroad track. That is what we deemed as our boundary. And any state route that was within that light blue line that squiggles around the downtown Midtown area was going to be included in our study, which over on the left-hand side, you can see the study corridors that still had a vast amount of corridors that we needed to analyze in a quick fashion as well. What exactly design considerations were we looking at? We knew we were trying to look at multimodal perspective on this. So we really defined it as we need to look inside the right-of-way, curb to curb limits, look at bike lanes, lighting, medians, pedestrian refuge, road diets, separated cycle tracks, side paths, etc. All that was on the table. And that mainly came from a review of like NACTO, FHWA, working with our own design policy office and what we could consider. But that really outlined what type of infrastructure improvement we were looking at, but it really emphasized that we need to look at everything within those curb points, like I mentioned, which means that we're taking a lane away. And so that has a huge potential operational impact. So we needed to be able to understand that better. Studies and plans reviewed. We pulled everything out. Anything that was laying around that had City of Atlanta or Atlanta or Beltline or MARTA, whatever the case may be, our transit agency, we reviewed it, understood what they proposed, and that went into what we reviewed in our plans as well. Next, of course, we looked at the pedestrian and bicycle crash data. We looked at it from a crash density standpoint. Again, we needed to be able to not only go through this data and then be able to write a report on the data, but we need to be able to present the data in a way that was easily digestible, but also be able to pull this together in a short period of time. So what you're looking at now is density. So yellow means that there was very, very few pedestrian or bicycle crashes. And when you go up to the red, that means you have a higher rate of those crashes that are happening in terms of the frequency. We broke it, that was total crashes, then we broke it down into injury crashes, and trends started to develop. we're able to see along the corridors, along our study corridors. So that helped build our case and build our study. And we looked at fatality data as well, which again, trends started to develop that we were able to lock onto and be able to present that data in a meaningful form. We also looked at the change in density. This is actually pretty interesting. Yellow means that there's little to no change. Red means that there was actually an increase from the years 14, 15 to 17, 18. And the green is a decrease. Again, this was just another way of being able to look at the corridors and be able to understand better, where are the areas that we need to focus on first? Because again, we have to come up with a prioritized list. That was one of the key asking points. Next was going into the operational analysis. Luckily, like it was mentioned, I have an operation background, so I knew where I wanted to start. And you could go, again, you could need a lot of time to be able to go through this many corridors and understand where can I take a lane away to be able to put improvements in. And the first thing that came to my mind was a congestion scan. Congestion scan is a really quick way to be able to understand at what parts of the corridor and what days would also be very interesting, because we need to make sure we understand the difference between the weekend and weekdays. So this graphic is what we produced for each corridor and be able to put into the report and wrote up a very quick summary of what was going on and being able to identify the percent of congestion and at what part of the corridor. So this is 14th Street. This is right in the middle of Midtown Atlanta. And this is a very popular corridor. But it shows that once you get closer to the eastbound, the upper end, which is closer to our interstate system, there may not be as much flexibility in terms of being able to take a lane away or take capacity away. But as you work your way westbound through the corridor, more opportunity presents itself. And this was done for every, that was just focusing on those 2 points near the interstate. But this was done for every corridor. I couldn't fit every one of them on here, but this is just to show that how easily a congestion scan was being able to be digested, because you can look at this and you can pinpoint, without knowing anything about these corridors, which ones that we had flexibility and which ones that we don't have flexibility in. And that really was the driving point home for us, especially with the time that we had, to be able to show to our management and present to others outside the DOT on our methodology with that. We also, another quick analysis we did was the lane call. And this actually came from Florida DOT. We were able to take in ADTs and utilize the roadway classifications into a quick digestible way of like what lanes were going to be available. So quickly, when you look at this, if red or orange means no lanes or -1 lanes, you can quickly see that where we had the availability to be able to potentially do safety projects. Another thing we developed was a corridor profile. So everything within the study needed to be put into one sheet of paper for each corridor. And this was our approach to it. I know it's rather busy, but once you start dissecting it, it actually presents a lot of useful information that once sitting down, you're able to take a look at it and say, wow, I have a good understanding of what the crashes look like on the corridor. I understand where a study has been done. Where does the study cover? The congestion scan brings out the operational analysis on it. So again, really quick way of being able to digest that. Then we dive into the operation. So a quick summary of the entire study is here's all the corridors, and we came up with a matrix to be able to develop which ones we wanted to continue to actually dive in and actually program as a project. So those are all the purples that you see, and all the way down to either not recommending or already existing. Over on the left-hand side, the arrows that are pointing to each corridor, which again shows the impactfulness of this study, is everything that's in blue is currently in design or it's not constructed, but being designed or under the final TE study. The yellows are design and going into construction, and the greens indicated something that was already done. So success in that regard of being able to highlight really quickly the need and priority areas, and then push that into the development of a project that actually is going to be constructed. And proof of that, in case anyone doesn't believe me, here are some plans from some of the projects. And as you can see, this was a 4-lane facility, undivided, and we're coming in and putting in RFBs and restricting left turns. So it's a half R cuts in that scenario. And here's another one. This actually bypasses right underneath the belt line that's going north-south here. But this is actually RDA, and we're putting in those bicycle facilities, bike boxes, and really, focusing in on utilizing the roadway in a different fashion. And this is another one. This was Trinity. This was one it's currently in early stages of a study. But again, reutilizing the lanes. Lessons learned. I'm excited to try this again for another part of Georgia. There's a lot of new developments since we did this study, which was about a year ago. But utilizing things such as the wave enhancements, utilizing the comparison maps with travel time and speed, the corridor speed graphs. These are all things that, again, if you're looking to be able to complete an analysis in a quick fashion, being able to pull this up as a resource, these tools is going to be extremely beneficial, and I can't wait to be able to dive more into that for other projects. So again, 3 takeaways. You got a little bit of what the safety program was. Congestion scans, they could be used to justify a safety project. And hopefully I've displayed that well. And that high level data analysis, again, can be used to program projects, which we absolutely have done so far. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thanks, Sam. That was really great. And we have a couple questions coming in. Before we get to those, just wondered if you could touch a little bit more on kind of the audience for these graphics. I think when we were rehearsing this one, you talked a little bit about that. So just if you could touch on that really briefly.
Yeah, sure. The person that requested it was our state traffic engineer. But at that point, the first audience that we had was actually with our commissioner and executive management. And so the presentation that I showed today, bits and pieces of it came from that presentation I had with our commissioner. And it really is important to be able to have that information in a digestible form that he could see and quickly say, oh, I completely understand what you're talking about, and move forward with it. Other than our executive management here at the DOT, we met with other key stakeholders, such as City of Atlanta. That was definitely a key stakeholder, bringing them in and their management. MARTA, which our main transit agency, was another key stakeholder that we brought in, and advocacy groups for pedestrian and bike was also someone that we brought in, and that was actually really helpful. These type of graphics were also really helpful as well, because they don't have a lot of engineering background, but once you start putting together like colors and this color means this color means that was easy for them to be able to pick up on and be able to understand, oh, well, this corridor is very green. We have a lot of capacity here. That means we could do something. And it's like, yep, absolutely, you got it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I love the approach, because I think that congestion scan graphic is so easily understandable. We have a lot of great measures these days, but sometimes just explaining those measures doesn't always work for every audience. So I think an easy question that came in from the audience that you could answer is, what tool or software you use to develop the congestion scan graphics?
Oh yeah, that came directly from Redis. Yeah, we log on, we pull up the suite, and then go through the tools and pick out the congestion scan. Then you go in and you select. I mean, for Georgia, for us, we have a lot of saved routes because we have a lot of different people use that application. So we just go through, select those, or create your own. Pick the time frames, pick the data choices, and it displays it for you. And you can take that directly and put it into a report or a presentation. So yeah, rather easy tool to use in my opinion.
Yeah, great. And especially when you have some of that set up already, you really can take advantage of that. Another question came in talking about the latest edition of the Highway Capacity Manual talks a lot about multimodal design standards. So the question is, how is GDOT considering those recommendations? For example, and for crash analysis, did you look at any impacts due to COVID-19, things like lower volumes, higher speeds? I mean, we definitely saw that in the Philadelphia region. So I guess really sort of a two-part question there.
Yeah, no, any resource, especially new resources, because it's ever evolving. I think the mindset on looking at multimodal use and opening conversations to do kind of roadway transformational projects, I think there's more of an appetite for that from a DOT's perspective on it. So any new resources that such as the highway capacity manual, highway safety manual, I know is going through it, and then any from NACDA or whatever the case may be, those were all reviewed and continue to be reviewed within the program to ensure that we're keeping on top of things, because we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can based on new research, based on new data. But the second part of the question, what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Yeah. Second part had to do with, sort of looking at any changes due to the COVID-19 impacts.
Oh, yes.
Lower
Yeah.
volumes, higher speeds, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sorry, drew a blank. So a lot of states were in a similar position as Georgia going through the pandemic. Our fatalities actually increased at a pretty decent rate. Overall crashes decreased, but the higher severities were definitely something that I didn't expect at the very beginning. I think the only conversation I had, and they're not even a state, but Puerto Rico actually saw their fatalities decrease, but that's a little bit easier given that they're an island, and they probably had a little bit more control over things. But that definitely presents difficulties, but it also presents opportunity areas as well, because it highlights certain risk factors that we may have not been able to locate beforehand. So we see that as an opportunity, but speed wise as well, that definitely, we saw speeds go up across the board in several different categories in terms of driver behavior as well. And unfortunately, what we're also seeing is that those roadway users that, because of less police presence and because of less vehicles on the roadway, got used to driving in certain ways, and those driver behaviors, we're seeing those still build up into what we're seeing, our volumes return back to normal for most of the state. But more cars equals more opportunity to hit someone, unfortunately. So we're seeing that continue, that trend continue. But we actually developed a methodology for volumes for COVID. We actually had a weighted factor that we applied to our volumes. So there was a strategic approach from our DOT to be able, it was actually a memo that was sent out for anyone to be able to grow their volumes for any particular project or whatever the case may be for during the pandemic. But for the most part, for Georgia, we're seeing everything relatively return back to normal, especially in our rural areas. But it's the metro areas that may not be the case. But we may never see those volumes return back to those areas that we saw before, because teleworking is a lot more prominent now.
Yeah, interesting. We're seeing a lot of those same trends in our region. I'm going to keep going with questions because we have a lot. So Joanna, just stop us if we're going over here. But a lot of really good questions, so I want to try to get to them.
And we have just maybe a couple more minutes, and then maybe
okay,
Steve can answer them in the Q&A box.
Sounds good. The next question kind of gets into different ways that you might have been able to look at crash density. So the question is really, did you consider other ways of looking at crash density? For example, something like looking at per unit pedestrian or bicycle mile traveled. I guess with the idea that the places where there's high rates of crashes may not necessarily be unsafe relative to other locations. They may just have sort of more exposure, more bicyclists and pedestrians. So just, the question, I guess, too, is are there challenges estimating kind of the amount of bicycle and pedestrian users?
There is, especially because pedestrian and bicycle crash data is often underreported. So it's a difficult data set to be able to use in the first place. But during this analysis, we were able to utilize the tools that we had to be able to come up with those density charts. But there's absolutely different ways. If I were to do this study again, I wouldn't do it the same way with the density charts that I showed you. We have a new application called New Metric for the state of Georgia for safety analysis that has really blown the roof off on how we're able to process data at a super efficient rate. Everything that I went through, probably it took those 2 months or whatever the case may be. I could have done that through New Metric and done it through crash rate or an EPDO or through just a frequency standpoint. in days. So there's definitely different ways to dissect that. At the time, to answer the question at the time, that was the best data that we could process in the amount of time that we had, but there are new ways to do it for sure.
Great. Well, thanks, Sam, and appreciate all the questions from everyone. We do have a couple more questions in the chat. We're going to move on at this point in the interest of time. So Sam, if you're able to maybe answer some of those in the Q&A box, you can type an answer in there for folks. And folks, feel free to keep putting questions in there because we do have the ability to answer those via text as we keep going. But with that, I will turn it over to Michael Pack to talk about the freight rerouting from the closure on I-95 in Baltimore.
Hi, everybody. So what I'm going to present today is actually a presentation that Greg Jordan put together for an Federal Highway Administration crowdsourced group to talk about how you could potentially use trips, trajectories, and breadcrumb or waypoint data for operations and analyzing operations in general. Greg couldn't be here today, so I'll go over this. So what we're going to be looking at is a real world scenario. We've got a crash that occurred on January 19th in 2021 on I-95 northbound, just barely south of Baltimore. And this ended up closing all of the lanes for over 4 hours. Well, about 4 hours. So here's the incident timeline showing all the responders that showed up and all the tow trucks. You can see the lanes are blocked for quite a while. This is just a picture from overhead traffic helicopter that looked at the cleanup. It was a pretty bad collision. Using the trend maps, we were able to go in and just to show you the impacts here. Again, on the right-hand side, this is the day of the crash at 3 p.m., just after the crash has occurred. The left-hand side is a normal day, like a week before at 3 p.m. Here is 4 p.m. You can see no one's getting through. The road's actually closed. The queues are backing up. People are starting to take alternate routes. There is an actual specific alternate route, a detour route, that was put on by the Maryland Department of Transportation, telling folks to go down east and get on Route 1 and go up north. And so you're starting to see some of the traffic here where people are getting on the ramp to then take that exit. But by 7 p.m., the incident has just started to clear and the lanes have started to open up again, but you still have residual delays. By 8 p.m., everything had pretty much cleared up and we're back to normal. So that's the normal probe data analytics, let's look at this crash type of the thing. What we're doing here, though, is we're going to try to look at how people rerouted themselves around this particular crash. So the Maryland Department of Transportation is purchasing a freight-related trips data set, which tells us where the commercial vehicles were moving throughout the day of the incident and other days as well. So what we did is we went into the trips analytics tool and we did what's called a from to filter, where again, here is the location of the crash. And what I want to do is I want to capture all the freight vehicles that were kind of coming from the south and heading up to the north. So anyone who passed through the Beltway down here, just above DC, and then started to go north, and then passed through this zone up here. That's your from and your to. So people going south to north. And the result is we first looked at just a normal day. So what does traffic normally look on this roadway? Look like on this roadway. So you can see all these blue and orange lines. These are routes that people would take to get from down here up to past the 2 area. The difference between the color is just what I've clicked on at the time. And I drew a screen line. It's this green line that goes across here. And I told the system, tell me what percentage of traffic took each one of these routes. So the main route, I-95, you got about 62% of traffic. To the west on 29, you got 4% of the traffic, then 5% over here, 1% way out here. And then, well, you know, a fair amount of people are going out east on US 50. This takes you across the Bay Bridge, and then you can go up north along Delaware to go further up into New York. So a decent amount of commercial vehicle traffic heading that direction. So that's a normal day. And then we said, let's look specifically at the day that the crash occurred, and specifically during the times in which all of the lanes are closed. So I filtered down to that 2:45 to 7:45 or whatever the time period was of the actual crash. And you can see that there's actually 0 cars that are making it through, I'm sorry, 0 commercial vehicles that are making it through I-95 where the crash is. No one makes it. And now we can see the percentages and how they've changed. So 36% are still going up 95, 9% to the west, and you know, we've got higher numbers to the east. It's hard to remember what they were, so let's put them side by side. On the left-hand side is the normal day. So normally you had 4% way out to the west, 9% on the day of the incident, 36% on 95 the day of the crash versus normally 62%. And we saw a lot of uptick in the eastward travel as well. It went from a normal of 28% of the traffic up to 44%, decided to take a large detour and go all the way up the East Coast there in Delaware. So that is looking kind of at the middle between DC and Baltimore. So anyone who's going to make a decision to change, you might have changed down here, but let's look right up where the crash occurred. And let's look at how the traffic changed there. So now I drew a screen line right near the crash location. And again, this is a normal day when the road is open. 81% of the traffic is still taking 95, 7% is going all the way up to I-70, and fewer percentages are to the east. Now, what we told people to do, what MDOT told people to do was to get off here, go over to, get off here, go over to Route 1 and head north, back up to the Beltway. So on the day of the crash, when this road is blocked, now we see no one's getting through on 95, so there's 0% there. Significant uptick up here, and then down to the right, you have some vehicles that are taking the detour that we wanted them to take, but it's a low percentage, it's 9%. So let's compare these. This is on the right, we have a normal day. On the left, we have the day in which the crash occurred. So this point right here went from 1% to 9% of traffic. Here we went from 7% to 17%. And there were some new routes that weren't normally taken that now people are taking on the day of the crash. So, this analysis took, an hour or two to run and bring back all these results. And now we see how commercial vehicles are detouring around. But we're telling people to detour down onto a particular road that happens to have signals along it. So the question is, were the signals impacted? And if so, in what way? And do we need to think about retiming those signals when there's a crash and we have to send people on this detour? So we went in and we used the intersection analytics. And this here is the detour that we're telling people to take. We want them to go take this exit, then make a left-hand turn onto Route 1 going north. And these pink dots, these are the locations of signals for which we're pulling in data from different systems. So here, this is what the left-hand turn looks like. And what I did is I said, well, let's look at the average control delay on the day of the crash compared to like the 2 normal days before this. And so at 2 p.m., 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., we went from, a relatively low control delay to a pretty high control delay, 148 seconds in the 5 p.m. hour, 95 seconds turning left on the 6 p.m. hour. Now, maybe that's not unbearable, but it's certainly different than it would normally be and might be worth investigating. Now, similarly, let's look, instead of turning left, let's look at people that are just going straight up this roadway. And let's see what the average control delay is in the crash day compared to the same 2 days prior. You can see we went from, a dozen or so seconds up to almost a minute during the 5 p.m. hour. So it affected the people turning left and the people going straight. There's certainly more details and more things that we could look into here, but this is a quick and dirty way to show you how some of this connected vehicles data can be used to start to understand what's happening when you have big crashes and how it's impacting your network. With that, I think we turn it over to Rick Ayers now.
Thank you, Michael. That's a terrific segue. Joanna, just quick check. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yep,
You can-
I can hear you.
all right. Michael can hear me, everybody else can. So terrific segue to what I'm going to share with you. On behalf of John Allen, my colleague at the CATT Lab, for the Performance Measures Reporting Working Group. Next slide, please. Just want to acknowledge the Performance Measures Reporting Working Group. All of their time is volunteered. Particular attention and acknowledgement to John Allen, who builds out these report templates that some of you have already begun to explore and utilize in reporting and telling your story with regard to performance measures, incidents, accidents across your state. I thought it'd be interesting to talk to this visual really quickly, in that the CATT Lab for 20 years has been building out, in the lower right, these data visualizations and analytics to help kind of better understand this vast volumes of transportation big data. Part of your work as transportation professionals and practitioners is to kind of narrate and provide insights in meaningful, insightful ways to executives, elected officials, and the general public. Next slide. The report templates that we're building out in the performance measures report working group is starting to build out are a suite of templates that you can download and tell your story. Some of those stories already that we've seen, we have on our public-facing website, our corridor performance reports, a series of monthly congestion reports, as well as project assessment reports. What I'm going to share with you today, next slide, are some new report templates that we anticipate being available on the report templates website here within the next week or two. On the left-hand side, you see the top 10 bottlenecks. That's been a big push by the RITIS user group community. Hey, we'd love to have some top 10 bottleneck report templates. And similar to the story that Michael just told in terms of an after action assessment or analysis, we're building out some reports that will help you tell stories similar to that in a more meaningful, insightful, and easy to digest way. To come, the Performance Measure Report Working Group is also going to have some holiday travel forecast templates. We'll see those in the third quarter of this year is our anticipated timeframe for those. Next slide, please. So I understand we have a few new users or a few new attendees today's meeting. If you've not explored the RITIS report templates website, I highly encourage you to do that. Do so. Esther, if we could at some point fire off that URL to the community in our chat box. There will be 2 new options of report templates available on that landing page. There'll be an after action review report, a series of reports, and again, a bunch of top 10 bottleneck reports. Next slide. As part of publishing these this suite of new reports that you'll have available to you. We'll also provide some design resources like the existing reports. We'll have the how-to guides, how to fill them out. But what will help support and reinforce and educate you on best practices and how to implement and use these reports. Next slide. I'm getting ahead of myself. We are going to have a workshop in November, but I added this in just a couple of days ago to share with you. This is an example of a terrific after action executive level report. Was at a conference in Florida last week, was chatting with some colleagues, consultants that do work for our friends at VDOT. Hats off to VDOT, who's already implementing. This is a 2-page after action incident summary report where they peppered in their narrative and their performance summary charts and their trend map and snapshots of the incident itself. So a wonderful, terrific example of after action template reports that were implemented to support VDOT and helping their kind of management chain better understand critical incidents in the state of Virginia. Next slide. Again, we are planning to deliver on November 17th a workshop that will walk through the development of one of these after action reports. So we're really excited about that. This will be a 1-hour workshop in which we'll walk through taking one of these templates that you'll see on our report templates website and populating that using probe data analytics tools. So with that, I close. Last slide. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. That's really great work. And just, encourage anyone who's, used any of these templates or done anything like this to share your stories with us. Great to have more examples like this and mark your calendars for that workshop. That should be really helpful. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the Q&A, so I think we can move right into the RITIS Enhancement Working Group updates.
All right, can you hand control back to me, please? Thank you. All right, so we met a couple of months ago with the RITIS Enhancement Working Group to give some updates on cost estimates for various features and get states to give a final vote on what they wanted us to work on. And this vote was only for states that were actually contributing funding to the RITIS Enhancement Working Group. And we've had 6 states, maybe 7, say that they are contributing funds, and we've actually put together contracts for a good number of these states. So we are going to have funding available to work on projects. This is the final vote that we had. Pink, if you see a number with pink in it, that means, well, this one right here, 3 agencies said this is our top priority. Gray is like second priority. So 1 agency said this was their second priority. Purple would be their third priority, and so on for the legend down here. So there's quite a bit of interest in automated work zone reporting. And there's a lot of interest in enhancing the causes of congestion analytics, both of which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. And then there's also interest in weather data integration. What we're struggling with right now is this automated work zone reporting tool could be incredibly big and perhaps more funding than we might have right now. So we're probably going to do a few iterations of some design work with the enhancement user group to pitch several ideas and go back and forth and try to get what this thing would actually look like before we commit significant dollars to it. and we'll work on some of these other tasks in the meantime. We are also still getting one state to finalize their contribution, so we know exactly how much funding we're going to have. So, I don't have any news that says this is exactly what we're going to do yet, other than we're going to start doing some design work with the enhancement group. So if anyone is interested in helping out with the design and writing requirements with us, or like a concept of operations for this automated work zone reporting tool or set of capabilities, please send me an email or write in a chat box, so we've got your contact information. We'll sign you up for that. Probably do a working group on it. And with that, I'm going to move on to giving you an update on all the enhancements that we've made to the suite since we last got together. So some of these are big, some of these are small. The small ones are, we've done some work to clean up legends and make sure that we're accounting for all of the different types of incidents in the right place. You don't see a lot of these that often, but they do pop up in certain parts of the country where we have some pretty serious weather and other types of events. And so that's in the lower left-hand corner, RITIS and traffic view. We've improved the way we sort the incident list. We had some issues with this thing not sorting quite right based on whether words were capitalized or not. That's been fixed. We've also updated the RITIS tool catalog and tutorials to talk about the new corridor time comparison tool that GDOT funded last year. And that's been updated. Within the detector tools, this is where you can go and look at ITS sensors for speed and volume data. We made some enhancements so that if an agency changes the name or IDs of detectors, that there's a history of how those things were changed over time. And we were able to create an ability to be able to go back in time and see the history of those name changes. There's some other smaller updates for my history. If you run a bunch of reports that you don't care about and you don't want to see them anymore, you can now delete those and get rid of them in your history section. In the massive data downloader, specifically for the NPM RDS, there is now a few additional parameters that you can export. So estimated unidirectional through lanes, AADT, single unit truck and bus AADT, and combination truck AADT can now all be downloaded through the NPM RDS. Well, when it's associated with the NPM RDS data, you can grab that. And with respect to the massive data downloader, we've completed revision 2.0 to the metadata document for NPM RDS. That's under a new contract now. The CATT lab is still the prime with INRIX, Texas A&M, KMJ, and One Spatial. We've updated some of the documentation. And for those of you who use the NPM RDS data, you should see some of that data has been rolling out and will be rolled out much, much quicker than it used to. Instead of monthly, it's going to be rolled out weekly. With the TRIPS analytics tools, and I just showed you some examples of what could be done with TRIPS analytics earlier, looking at that particular incident on I-95, we have deployed what we call our next generation TRIPS analytics tools, which now allow you to do a lot more with spatial and temporal filtering and setting up study areas. And it's hard to really go through and describe everything that's in there. So instead, what I thought that I would do is show you an example of how I recently used this new version of TRIPS Analytics to do some research for the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. So for those of you who have access today, if you were to go in, you can create a study, or you can bring up old studies. You can go in and you can do all sorts of cool stuff. You can load spatial filters, load study areas, and set other temporal filters. What I did is I went down to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and the Park Service is having a real hard time with managing traffic that's coming into the park. It's one of the only free national parks in the country, and is, I think, the most heavily visited park as well. And so they really want to understand travel patterns into and around the park. So luckily, Tennessee Department of Transportation has purchased trips data. And so we have access to data in the park. And what I did is I went in and I created a bounding box for the park border. So this is the boundary of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park right here. So I created that, you load it up into the tool. And then I said, let's look at the July 4th weekend and tell me, for everyone who went into the park on July 4th, where did they come from before they entered the park? And I said, let's just look at like county areas. And for that report, for the output of that, see that the majority of the people who entered the park came from this one particular county right here. I think that's Sevier County. I'm not quite sure. Over 14,000 people right there. They probably stayed the night and then they drove in. Other people started their trips much, much further away and drove all the way into the park on this particular day. But the Park Service wants to know more. They want to know, okay, well, where are people going into the park? And for people going to certain destinations, where are they coming from? So here I further cordoned off the park by important areas. So these are places in the park that might have like a fun campsite or horseback riding, or maybe there's a hike to a waterfall or a big overlook or something like that. And all the little dots that are on the edge, those are entrances to the park. That's how you can get into or out of it. Now, admittedly, some of these are like dirt roads that most people don't drive on, and there's far fewer actual passenger vehicle roads. But anyway, we went in. I said, okay, let's again look in July, and let's take a look at where people are going to once they enter the park. What are the highest locations, and which entrances are getting the most traffic? And so we get the percentage of people going in at each one of these entrance points, but then we can also click on an individual location. Say, okay, well, of the X number of people who went there, here's how many people came from this location or that location or that location. So you see how they're actually getting into the park. The other thing you can do is you can expand the study area. So this is the park boundary right here. I've expanded the study area to the counties surrounding the park. And now I want to look at which routes people are taking specifically to get into the park. So again, I went in and I set some spatial filters, and I set some temporal filters. And for the date that I selected, I think this is sometime in January, it shows me, okay, here's all of the routes that people drove on before they entered into the park. And then you can put your mouse over any part of one of these roads, and it tells you, okay, well, how many trips actually crossed at that particular location where I put my mouse, and what is that compared to all the trips that's in the data set? Or if you then click, it then shows you for anyone who drove across that little stretch where I clicked, here's all the routes they took in blue before they crossed that part of the roadway that I clicked on. Or like I showed you earlier, you can draw a screen line, which will tell you what percentage of people going into the park crossed at a particular location, so you can see which routes are the most popular. And again, you can keep clicking on individual crossing points and locations, and it'll show you, once people cross that boundary, where did they go, which routes they taken. So some of them kind of went on circular routes to get in the park. So those are the new capabilities and features that have been deployed very recently and are now available to you all. There's lots and lots of other bugs, minor bugs, annoyances that we worked on. I won't go over all of these, but if you go to any of the tools, there's always a what's new, or there's a release notes section that you can click on, and it will give you details on everything that we fixed or worked on within the last, wherever. You can go back as far as you want. So those are the things that we've deployed, but there's a lot of stuff we're working on and have been working on for months and are almost ready to deploy. And the biggest one of these is the causes of congestion deep dive analytics. So I think everyone has seen the cause of congestion tool. That shouldn't be new to anyone here. It breaks up the entire country by state and by county for all of 2019, and it tells you how much congestion user delay cost there was. But it does stick you to, like the entire year or a month or whatever, and an entire county. We are almost finished, as in like a week or two away from deploying a deep dive version of the cause of congestion analytics tool, where just like in the Probe Data Analytics Suite, you'll be able to select any road or set of roads that you want and any date range, and it will give you the cause of congestion pie charts for the geography that you selected. We're starting with deploying this for the state of Virginia. We've worked on their data first, since they're the agency that paid for the bulk of this, and then it will span out to all the other states that are in RITIS and using Probe Data Analytics. So look for this very, very, very soon, like in the next couple of weeks. I've also been working on optimizations for how we display transit layers and bus locations and trains in RITIS. There's so many buses and trains now that the system is starting to kind of slow down when you turn on too many things. So we're working on optimizing that, and we're also deploying bike share locations and related bike data in the DC region, and are looking to do that in other parts of the country as well. I think those are all of the big updates that I could think of. Does anyone have any questions about any of this before I move on?
Michael, there's two questions in the question and answer box, as well as one person, Patrick Liakas from Watchdog, has his hand raised.
Okay, why don't we start with the written questions? So how far back are the new fields available for NPM RDS? I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to look that up. I think Doug Warner, I think you're on the line. Could you get in touch with Tom Jones, and maybe he could respond and we could type it in before the end of the webinar. If not, we'll put it in the notes afterwards. Sorry about that. James Lee. In the Smoky Mountain example, I was wondering if through traffic was considered. Can you shed some light on it? Great question. So I'm going to go back to the query setup, and there is a way to define what type of traffic you want included in these analytics. So you can say, hey, I just want trips that started inside of an area, or trips that started outside, or trips that ended inside, or trips that ended outside, or trips that just went through. So they didn't actually have a destination in the park. Maybe they just drove through it and kept going. That is something you can definitely do with these queries that are over these little check boxes that are over here on the left. You can do all sorts of other pass-through filters as well, for like from and to and all sorts of stuff. It's pretty powerful. And was there, you said someone had their hand up?
Yes, Patrick, if you'd like to talk, your line is unmuted. You need to unmute yourself.
Who did you call on?
Patrick Ziliakis from Washcog.
Patrick, if you're still there, unmute yourself. While he's doing that, another question came in. For trip analytics, if one trip crosses study boundary twice, is it recognized as one unique trip. A trip is more about whether or not it was continuous or not. So it could cross a boundary 2, 3, or 4 times, as long as it didn't stop and turn off the car or wait for too long. It's still just considered one trip. It's not how many times it passes through. But you can actually see sometimes, like if you were to draw out the routes, you might see a trip that starts, goes into a place, comes back out, and circles around you. You would see those circular routes moving about. And I think that's one of the powers of this, is it exposes things in the data like that. It's not just giving you an answer in the end, it gives you the power to figure out if there's any weirdness in the data. Because sometimes the data providers give you weird data that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. This can point that stuff out and help you do some error checking and validation.
That's a great point, especially for this data source is relatively new. We're still learning to use it. It looks like Matt Glasser has his hand raised. So Matt, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, appreciate that, Jesse. Michael, I was just curious why, why you guys use separate software for doing the like the custom geographies as opposed to what we do with the rest of the PDA suite.
It's just we haven't gotten to it yet. We literally had to we had to stop somewhere. That is the next thing we're working on. So don't worry, you won't have to do that very long.
Can you maybe also touch, Michael, on kind of the difference between some of these tools at this point? I think someone had asked in the Q&A, how do you access the trip analytics? I think at this point, hard for people to keep track of all the tools, which is a good problem.
Yeah, it is. So your agency's ability to access these tools is dependent on whether or not your agency has purchased the data that is required for these tools. So this trips analytics that I was just showing here for the Smoky Mountains, there's a separate data set that you have to buy, and it can come from NRIX, it can come from Wejo, it can come from Geotab, Future Mobility. There's all sorts of different companies you can buy this data from. We don't care who you buy it from, but someone has to buy it first. And then once you've got that, then we can take it and put it into the tools and make it available to you. Now, that said, if you're the neighbor of a state that has purchased the data and you're in the coalition has done some really great work in defining acceptable terms and conditions for sharing of data between agencies. So, there might be a way for you to get access to the tool, even if you're not the state that purchased the data. And, for example, Georgia bought data, Tennessee bought data, North Carolina bought data. I don't think Virginia has purchased data yet, but, there are lots of trips that go from Tennessee and North Carolina into Virginia. And so, there might be some value in Virginia, looking at that data and saying what's going on.
If anyone else has other questions, feel free to enter those in the Q&A. One question that I had, Michael, was you mentioned integrating bike share information for DC, and was just curious, what that process looks like. Because I know in Philadelphia, we also have a bike share, and the city might be interested in looking into that.
Yeah, so right now, we're integrating the bike share in DC because Northern Virginia is going through this really cool program right now. It's called the RM3P, Regional Multimodal Mobility Program. It's kind of like a giant integrated corridor management project. They probably hate me for saying that. It's like a giant ICM project for the entire Northern Virginia region. It's going to have some predictive capabilities and all sorts of other decision support capabilities. And trip incentivization type capabilities associated with it. Redis is the data platform behind all of that logic. And so we've had to ingest all this multimodal data to help these other systems analyze trip patterns and that sort of stuff and make some recommendations. So we've integrated for that purpose. We haven't actually figured out what we are going to do with the bike share data in Redis directly. Right now, it's just part of the APIs that run Redis. And so if someone wants access to the bike share data through the Redis API, they can get it. We will be working sometime in the future and putting it on the front end of Redis or integrating it into some of these other tools. We just haven't figured out what that should look like yet. But if you and your city are interested and have some ideas and needs, let us know what they are, which gets into our agency input session. We need to know what it is that you all are looking for, what's working, what's not working, so that we can make things better.
That's a good segue again. If folks have things they'd like to share, issues you're struggling with, things you're using the tools for, now's a great time to either enter something in the Q&A or raise your hand if you want to speak in the meeting. I guess while we're waiting, one other question, I'll take advantage of being able to pepper you with questions, Michael. A lot of folks may be aware that the feds recently put out kind of a notice of proposed rulemaking for a greenhouse gas performance measure. And I know that I think Redis you've been looking at a way to integrate, the ability to look at emissions at a link level. And I know that's another analysis that requires certain data sets. So I don't know if maybe you could touch on what's required for that and where that particular tool kind of stands at this point.
Sure. So that is a functioning tool. But as you said, it requires special data for it. So we received a couple of $1 million from the Department of Energy to specifically build out some energy analytics. And those have been integrated into the Probe Data Analytics Suite. There's where is it? Energy use and emissions matrix, energy use and emissions trend map, energy use and emission charts. There's a dashboard that you can configure to tell you how much energy is being consumed, how much emissions are out there. It even predicts like the next couple of hours. For this to work though, we need vehicle ownership data. So we need to know down to like the zip code level, how many vehicles are of a certain engine type, how many are electric, plug-in hybrid, all that sort of stuff. We can't do the modeling and the analysis without that. So for the pilot that we did for DOE, we did it for the National Capital Region, and we also did it for the Columbus MPO. They were able to get us their vehicle ownership data. If others are interested in this tool and can get us vehicle ownership data, we can talk to you about what it's going to take to enable these tools. Otherwise, you're welcome to look at the tools and see how they work in those other geographies. I think we looked at buying, there are companies that will sell you vehicle ownership data, kind of like Enrix and here and TomTom sell you Probe data. And we wanted to buy it for the entire United States, but it was going to be like close to $300,000 to buy that. And we don't have $300,000 laying around. No. That said, there is a possibility that we're going to go after some more Department of Energy funds that might make this available in the future. But again, if you want it and you need it, write to us. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to follow up on that. There's a lot of interest in our region, especially with some of the new funding sources in the IIJA. It's gonna be really helpful. We did just get a question in asking how to navigate to the crash reporting tools.
So we only really have a true crash reporting tool for the state of Maryland. And it's pretty old at this point. They're not sending us their crash data anymore, but we do archive all of the ATMS crash data and events and work zone data, and that's part of the data archive. So if you go to the tabs at the top, you go to the data archive. It's called the event query tool. Then you can go down and it's got a list of all the states. And for each state, you can click on it and it'll tell you, what data sources we have available in that state. And so like in Maryland, we have a Howard County period dispatch feed. We also have Maryland DOT's ATMS platform. And you select whatever it is you want. And then there's filters where you can say, okay, I only want to look at certain types of crashes or incidents. And I want to look at certain date ranges. Then you can type that stuff out and hit submit, and it'll give you some tables that you can export to Excel. It'll also give you some other filtering and mapping hotspot analysis capabilities as well. But it's not that traditional crash analytics that a lot of people want. We do have a cost estimate for what it would take to build out that crash reporting tool for the entire country, and that is one thing that the enhancement group voted on last quarter.
And this may be related to that, but there was a clarification that that Robert meant the Incident Clustering Explorer tool. I'm not familiar with that one.
The Incident Clustering Explorer tool no longer exists. That was decommissioned probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. We have the event query tool, which does a lot of the same things. So I would start there.
And I think you were noting earlier related to Sam's presentation, someone had asked about the congestion scan, and there is the ability, right, to show crashes with the congestion scan tool if you're looking at certain ranges.
Yeah, absolutely. So long as the agency is giving us their incident and event data, you can overlay that on top of congestion scan, trend maps, bottleneck ranking, is a bunch of tools that will allow you to do that. There's some display options in the upper right hand corner of all the results of those queries. If you click that display options, it'll give you the ability to turn those on and off.
Well, last call for any questions, comments, any agency discussion anybody wants to bring up? Looks like we've answered everybody's questions, so just thank all the presenters again. As always, ton of great information. Thanks everybody who's hung on to the call through this part, through all of this. I guess Joanna, any last items you want to cover for housekeeping?
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you for hosting the whole meeting. Thank you to all our presenters. Just a reminder that after the meeting, we'll be providing a Q&A summary. The Q&A summary, as well as the slides and a recording of this presentation, will be made available on the Eastern Transportation Coalition's website, and you all will receive an email with a link to that information when it becomes available. I think that's all I have, Jesse.
Sounds good. Well, I guess we can end a little early, give folks a little bit of time back in your afternoon or morning, depending which coast you're on. But once again, just thank you, everyone. Thanks to all of our speakers, everyone from the CATT lab and all the support staff. Another great session. Really appreciate everyone's participation.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse.
Take care all.